Today I want to share with you a powerful and danked black's most common reply, e5. We're going to explore the Scotch Gambit, which comes from the Scotch opening, but instead of capturing the pawn with the knight, as in the main line, we play bishop to c4. This move is sharper, far more aggressive, and aims to sacrifice a pawn in exchange for rapid development and dangerous attacking chances. You're going to enjoy this line because it's solid, aggressive, and surprisingly simple. But before we dive into the main ideas, let me show you a tricky shortcut that works really well in blitz games. Now, of course, bishop to c4 is the main move that we'll be analyzing throughout this video. However, before we get into that, let me first show you a sharp alternative, knight to g5. As I mentioned earlier, this move is not something I'd recommend against experienced players, but against beginners or intermediate opponents, especially in fast time controls, it can be extremely effective. So what's the trick? When you play knight to g5, many players are tempted to respond with pawn to h6 to chase the knight away. And here comes the surprise. You don't retreat. Instead, you sacrifice your knight with knight takes on f7. After black captures the knight, you immediately deliver check with bishop to c4. This sacrifice drags the black king out into the open. If they try to retreat with king to e8, you simply play queen to h5, and suddenly it's checkmate, very similar to scholar's mate, but executed in a far more forcing way. Even if the opponent tries to escape differently, their king ends up running all over the board, and within just about 11 moves, the game is over. To be completely honest, black doesn't have to retreat their king and get checkmated. They can move the king elsewhere, and in doing so, actually save an extra piece. For example, if they play king to e7, it's true that black keeps the material advantage, but I'd say it's still not the end of the world for white. You can continue in true gambit fashion with pawn to c3, planning to recapture with the knight. Even though the computer would defend this position easily and suggest black is winning, in a real game against a human opponent, things are very different. The black king sitting on a7 is extremely exposed, your knight has active jumping squares, and you'll enjoy long-term attacking chances with strong initiative. But now, let's move into the main focus of this video, the Scotch Gambit proper. The critical move here is bishop to c4. This is the real deal, a move you can confidently play against anyone, even Magnus Carlsen himself, if you ever get the chance. From here, black has a few logical replies. They might choose bishop to c5 to defend the pawn, bishop to b4 to deliver a check to your king, or knight to f6 to put pressure on your pawn on e4. We're going to carefully analyze all of these options and see how white can respond. So, these are the three main replies black has that could potentially cause you some problems, and we'll go through them one by one. Let's start with bishop to b4 check. This is a very thematic idea for black, making use of the pawn on d4 so that it's not so simple for you to play pawn to c3 and drive the bishop away. But despite that, you go ahead and play pawn to c3 anyway. After black captures, it's very important that you recapture with the pawn, not the knight. The reason is simple. You want to gain a tempo by attacking black's bishop, forcing it to move again. Now, at this point, some very common tricks can occur. For instance, if black tries to play it safe with bishop to a7, it immediately backfires. You strike with queen to d5, and suddenly the checkmate on f7 cannot be stopped. If black tries to defend with the knight, you simply capture the knight first, and then take on f7 with the queen anyway. Game over. So let's reset the position back to the starting point of the Scotch Gambit and see what other options black has after bishop to b4 check, pawn to c3, and the pawn exchange. If black decides to play bishop to c5, it looks like a very natural move, but in reality, it's a mistake. Here you already have a neat little tactical shot. Bishop takes on f7 check. After black captures with the king, you bring in your queen to d5, creating a devastating double attack on both the king and the bishop. On the next move, you'll recover your piece, but now black's king is stuck in the center. They can no longer castle, which leaves them with long-term problems, while material remains equal. That gives you a fantastic position going forward. Alright, let's go back to the starting position of the Scotch Gambit. We've already seen that bishop to b4 check isn't really the best option for black, even though it's tempting and quite a few of your opponents will play it. Another very common choice here is bishop to c5, aiming to set up something that looks like an Italian game, or at least trying to transpose into it. But in this case, you can still make full use of the power of your bishop sitting on c4. Coming back to this particular position, you can actually use the very same tactical idea we looked at earlier. You begin with pawn to c3, offering a gambit pawn. If black accepts and expects you to recapture with the knight, that's where the tactics begin. Instead, you strike immediately with bishop takes on f7 check, followed by queen to d5 check, king back to e8. And then, that little intermediate check on h5 is absolutely critical. Why? Because after black defends with pawn to g6, you take on c5, and now the difference becomes clear. Imagine black grabs your pawn on b2 and you recapture with your bishop. Suddenly, the fact that their pawn is sitting on g6 instead of g7 is a huge weakness. The diagonal becomes a nightmare for black to defend. At this stage, black's options are already extremely limited. If they try to protect their rook with knight to f6, you simply castle, bringing your rook into the game and connecting your pieces. The position is already heavily in your favor. Even if black attempts something like pawn to d6 to push your queen away, you respond calmly with queen to c4, keeping your queen centralized and maintaining immense pressure along both diagonals. From here, all of your pieces are coordinated and ready to strike. The key idea is the central break with pawn to e5, which directly targets the black king and opens lines for your rooks and queen. Sometimes black will try to get out of immediate danger with rook to f8, hoping to remove their rook from your powerful diagonal, but this simply allows you to continue building your attack with rook to e1, supporting the central pawn push. Once pawn to e5 comes, the pressure is overwhelming, and black's position can quickly collapse under the combined threats of your rooks, queen, and bishops. If black tries bishop to g4, that actually backfires right away. You push pawn to a5, and their whole position starts to crumble. The trades only make things worse because you immediately get powerful discovered checks and attacks against multiple pieces at once. Black simply cannot defend everything. It's just completely winning for white. Another typical idea shows up if black tries queen to e7, planning to play bishop to e6 and kick your queen away. But instead of retreating, you develop actively with knight to c3, and when that bishop comes out e6, you leap forward with knight to d5. The exchanges open the e-file, and suddenly your pieces are swarming in. With rooks and queen lined up, the pressure is unstoppable, and black is left with no real defense. The overall theme is clear. In the Scotch Gambit, black's natural-looking moves often walk straight into tactical disasters. You sacrifice a pawn, but in return, you get rapid development, open lines, and an attack that usually ends the game on its own. So, once again in the Scotch game, if black plays bishop to c5 trying to steer things into an Italian setup, you go with pawn to c3. Most opponents will grab that pawn, and we've already seen how that leads them into trouble. A stronger alternative for black is knight to f6, which can transpose into the Italian if you allow it. Instead of going down that heavy theory road, the cleanest approach is to strike immediately with pawn to a5, kicking the knight. If the knight retreats, you simply win back your pawn on d4 and even chase black's bishop in the process. But sometimes black will try to be clever with knight to e4. Against this, the safest and strongest plan is just to castle. You've got solid development and, more importantly, a hidden attacking resource, bishop to d5. Imagine black castles. Now bishop to d5 suddenly traps the knight on a4 completely. All of its escape squares are covered, and just like that, black finds themselves losing material. The big idea is that even when black avoids the obvious traps, the Scotch Gambit still gives white easy development, open lines, and dangerous attacking chances. Thanks for watching. If you think this video is helpful, then like and subscribe. See you in the next one.